I came back to my childhood home on a night when the walls felt closer than I remembered. The house was quiet in the way only old places can be, as if every sound had learned to move carefully. I was 28, old enough to know better than to run home after an argument, yet tired enough to do it anyway. My name is Evan Carter, and that night I carried more silence than luggage. Lucas and I had fought over nothing and everything, missed calls, a distracted tone, the sense that I was speaking to someone already halfway gone. He'd said he was exhausted. I'd said I was lonely. Neither of us had listened. When I drove away, I told myself I needed space. What I really needed was a place where I didn't have to explain myself. My father, Richard Carter, had left the porch light on. He always did when he knew I was coming, as if he could illuminate the path without stepping into it. He greeted me with a brief hug, the kind that lasted a second longer than necessary but not long enough to become a conversation. We exchanged practicalities, how long I'd stay, whether I'd eaten, and then he retreated to his room, leaving me with the familiar guest bedroom and its neatly folded quilt. That I lay awake for a long time, listening to the clock in the hallway count seconds like a metronome for my thoughts. Being openly gay had been easier outside these walls. Here, I still measured my words, even after years of telling myself I wouldn't. My father knew who I loved in theory, but we'd never spoken about it in a way that felt real. He accepted facts the way he accepted weather, without protest, without curiosity. Sometime after midnight, I heard soft footsteps. The door creaked, and Richard stood there, his face drawn with a concern he didn't know how to articulate. He asked if I was okay. I said yes because it was simpler. He nodded and, without quite deciding to, sat on the edge of the bed. He must have been more tired than he realized. His shoulders slumped, his breathing slowed, and before either of us addressed the strangeness of it, he fell asleep beside me, fully clothed, the lamp still on. I didn't move. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid of what the moment meant. There was nothing inappropriate in his presence, nothing I couldn't name as harmless. Still, my chest tightened. We had shared so little of ourselves that the sudden closeness felt like a language I had forgotten how to speak. His hand rested near the edge of the mattress, not touching me, and the space between us seemed louder than any contact could have been. As I lay there, memories surfaced uninvited. My father working late, my mother smoothing over absences with excuses, my own adolescence spent learning which parts of myself to keep quiet. I had wanted him to ask questions then, to notice the careful way I chose my words. He never did. And now here he was, asleep beside me, offering a presence without understanding, comfort without confession. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a small violence in the stillness. A message from Lucas lit up the screen. "We should talk tomorrow," it read. No apology, no warmth, just the distance I'd felt growing for weeks. I stared at the words until they blurred. Tomorrow had begun to feel like a place where things ended. I typed and erased a dozen responses before setting the phone face down. I didn't want to explain my night, the weight of my father's breathing, the ache of unsaid things. Lucas had his own silences, and lately they had multiplied. He used to ask about my day with genuine interest. Now his questions felt like obligations checked off a list. Richard stirred and murmured something unintelligible, then settled again. I wondered what he dreamed about. I wondered if he dreamed at all. The thought that he might wake and say something, anything, kept me suspended between hope and dread. Instead, the room remained unchanged, the lamp casting the same soft halo over our shared quiet. I thought about trust, how easily it erodes when left unattended. Lucas and I had built our relationship on honesty, or so I believed, but honesty requires maintenance. It requires the courage to speak when it would be easier not to. I had been brave in public, vocal about who I was, but private bravery was different. It demanded confrontation, not declarations. Eventually, the house settled into deeper sleep. I closed my eyes, letting the steady rhythm beside me anchor my thoughts. There was a strange comfort in knowing my father was there, even if the closeness highlighted everything we hadn't said. It reminded me that love could be present and incomplete at the same time. When dawn began to thin the darkness, I was still awake. The night hadn't given me answers, but it had sharpened my questions. About Lucas. About my father. About the ways I learned to stay quiet to keep the peace. I knew that when morning came, something would have to change. I just didn't yet know where the first crack would appear. Morning arrived wrapped in mist. The lake looked silver and still, a mirror without reflection. I woke to the faint creak of boards downstairs and the smell of coffee drifting through the hall. For a moment, I didn't move. The events of the night before, Mark's lingering gaze, the quiet tension, hung like fog in my mind. When I finally went down, my father was outside with Tom, both already dressed for chores. David sat at the counter, newspaper spread before him, his bare feet tapping softly on the floor. Mark stood near the window, stirring sugar into his mug. He turned as I entered, that same steady calm behind his eyes. "Morning, Ethan," he said. "Sleep well?" "Mostly." "Good." He smiled faintly, like the word carried more weight than it should. The day unfolded in slow fragments. My father and Tom repaired a loose section of dock, their laughter echoing over the water. David cleaned fishing rods, humming tunelessly. Mark joined me near the boathouse, where we sorted through tangled ropes and rusted hooks. The air smelled of lakeweed and sun-warmed pine. "You used to come here often?" I asked that he nodded. "Every summer, for a while." "Your dad, me, David, Tom. We thought the world began and ended at this lake." I looked at him. "And now?" "Now the world feels smaller." He smiled without looking up. "But memories make good company when the noise dies down." Something about the way he said it stayed with me, the hint of weariness behind the ease. His eyes were soft, but there was a gravity there, like he was speaking from a place far older than his years. By noon, the sun broke through, scattering gold across the water. We took the boat out, my father steering, Tom telling stories, David lounging with his feet over the edge. Mark sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed when the boat tilted. Each touch, however small, seemed to last a beat too long. That my father didn't notice, or pretended not to. He talked about old times, names I didn't know, jokes that belonged to another generation. I laughed when expected, but the laughter didn't belong to me. At one point, Mark leaned closer and said quietly, "He doesn't see you clearly, does he?" I turned toward him, startled. "What do you mean?" "He looks at you and still sees a boy. But you've grown in ways he doesn't understand." I didn't answer. The air between us tightened, wordless but full. Later, when we returned, my father disappeared into the shed with Tom, leaving David to light the evening fire. Mark lingered near the porch, polishing a glass absently. "You don't talk much," he said after a while. "I guess I learned from my dad." He chuckled softly. "Maybe. But sometimes silence says more than words." The comment struck deeper than I expected. There was no flirtation in his tone, no teasing, just quiet observation. It made me feel seen in a way that was almost uncomfortable. When dinner came, conversation flowed like warm current, drinks poured, plates passed, laughter rebounding through the room. My father grew louder with every glass, the way men do when they mistake volume for control. Mark, in contrast, spoke sparingly. Each word deliberate, each glance precise. I found myself watching him, the curve of his hand around the glass, the way his voice softened when he addressed me. At one point, David leaned across the table and said, "You look just like your father did at your age, Ethan. Maybe a little less trouble, though." "Don't bet on it," Tom added, earning another round of laughter, but Mark's gaze didn't join the humor. He looked at me for a long moment, then down at his drink. The noise around us faded, and for a breath, it felt like there were only two people in that room. When the plates cleared, the others drifted toward the fire pit outside. The night was thick with the smell of rain, clouds rolling in over the lake. My father sat with Tom and David, trading stories too loud for the calm that surrounded them. Mark stayed behind, collecting bottles, his movements unhurried. "Storm's coming," he said. "I know." He nodded toward the window. "You can feel it in the air before it arrives, like everything's holding its breath." I stood beside him, close enough to hear the low rhythm of his breathing. The rain began as a whisper on the roof, then gathered strength, rattling against the glass. Lightning flared across the lake, white and brief, the power flickered once and died. The room fell into darkness, broken only by the faint glow from the fireplace outside. "Guess we're on candle duty," Mark said quietly. He found a box on the shelf, lit a single wick. The small flame painted his face in shifting gold, the light softening the sharpness of his features. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't empty, it pulsed with something fragile, unspoken. "Finally," he said, "you remind me of myself at your age." I glanced up. "That's supposed to be a compliment?" He smiled faintly. "Depends who's asking." I laughed, though it came out shaky. He turned to the window again, rain streaking down the glass like veins. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who never really see us," he said. "And sometimes the ones who do, aren't supposed to." The words lingered, low and dangerous. Before I could respond, the screen door opened and David's voice called out, "Mark, you hiding from the storm?" He turned away, the moment breaking cleanly, like glass underfoot. "Just waiting for it to pass," he answered. David grinned, stepping inside with a towel draped over his shoulders. "Good luck with that. It's going all night." They spoke easily, old friends resettling into rhythm. I stood back, caught between presence and retreat, unsure which direction to choose. When the lightning flashed again, Mark's eyes met mine across the dim room. There was no smile this time, just an acknowledgement, quiet and deliberate. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake. Inside, laughter rose again, masking what had almost been said. Hours later, after the others had drifted to bed, I found myself awake in the dark. The rain still pressed against the roof, soft and steady. Somewhere below, footsteps moved lightly, then stopped. For a moment, I thought of going down, to speak, to ask, to understand, but I stayed where I was, caught between fear and longing. The lake house groaned with the weight of the storm, its walls whispering with wind and memory. I closed my eyes, knowing something irreversible had begun. Though neither of us had crossed any line, something had shifted in the quiet between us. And even through the noise of the storm, I could still hear Mark's voice. Low, patient, dangerous in its truth. "Sometimes the ones who see us, aren't supposed